Hello everyone, I'm Marlene Cramer from Edinburgh Napier University and I'm working in the In Future Wood project. This project focuses on the reuse of timber in construction and asks the question, how should we build today to be able to circulate tomorrow? My colleague Dan Ridley-Ellis and I took a step back and asked, how did we build yesterday and what inhibits the reuse of timber today? First, let's have a look at why we would want to reuse structural timber. Well, first of all, around 25% of wood waste comes from demolitions in the UK, and this is more than 1 million tons per year. But in the future, it is even likely that more wood waste will come from demolition sites, because nowadays around 25% of new built houses are in timber frame and contain a lot of timber material. But the reuse of this resource is not entirely straightforward for several reasons. Houses are somewhat different from plastic bags and paper cups. We don't use them and dispose of them. Instead, there are 30 to 120 years of use in between these two stages. And we don't know what happens to the timber during this time. So there might be some decay or degradation due to aging effects, or some damage, and this damage might even result from the demolition. It could also be that buildings come to the end of their life because there was faulty material in them. Either we put faulty material in there to begin with, or it became degraded over the time. So if only buildings come to the end of their life because of material failure, we would probably not need to bother with reuse. And then there might be some treatments and contamination. For example, there might be chemical treatments that were allowed 30 years ago, but are not allowed anymore. And there might be some other contaminations with materials that are connected to the timber. So we had a look at the demolition site in Edinburgh to find out which condition demolition timber really is in. And Michael Hunter from Charmic Demolitions provided the case study object and answered all our questions. The case study object was the Tor Christian Nursing Home in Edinburgh, or rather its extension. Here, this modern part of the building was demolished, the historic part, the Torwood House, remained standing. And this was done because the nursing home had been redundant for the last years and it is now replaced with 2 blocks of flats. But the building is actually still quite new. It was built after 1988 with an extension from 2004. And we had the chance to look at the building during the soft strip phase, and we saw that under the concrete shell there's actually a light frame timber structure. Here you see a stud wall with plywood sheathing. You see the roof structure is in solid timber. And the floor joists are solid timber as well, with chipboard floor covers. And the materials really looked quite good when we saw them during the soft strip. One thing that is done during the soft strip phase is the removal of all valuable items. In this case, this was a bit of medical equipment from the inside and this natural stone wall that could also be reused. Also, some internal solid wood doors were salvaged for reuse. Another thing that was removed was internal door frames, but they are only removed because the machines can't really separate them from other materials during the demolition phase. So they have to be removed by hand, but this is done with a crowbar, and afterwards they look like this. They are broken and not really in any condition for reuse. A lot of other materials just remain in the building. For example, wall tiles, toilets, sinks and service installations like smoke alarms, but also windows. The buildings are taken down with an excavator mostly. Here it separates metal from timber, and now you see how it shoves the timber beams out of the building. Then the materials are sorted also with the machine as much as possible, and smaller contaminations are removed by hand. The materials are sorted into skips, like one for timber, one for concrete, one for metal, and this is very important for recycling. Michael Hunter says that more than 95% of these materials can be recycled, and that only one skip goes to landfill for every 3 to 4 skips that go to timber recycling. We saw that before the demolition, the timber was intact. And then there was a small moment in which the excavator grabbed the roof structure and tore it out of the building, and it cracked like toothpicks. After the demolition, it is really damaged, but it is fit for purpose, because the timber is recycled, and that means chipping. Chipping and use in chipboards, but mostly for energy recovery nowadays. If we would want to reuse it, of course, this extra damage that comes from demolition would be a problem. But even before the demolition, we find a lot of material contaminations. Not so much chemical contaminations, only 1% of wood waste in the UK is currently classified as hazardous. So chemical contaminations and preservative contaminations wouldn't necessarily limit the reuse of timber, but there are a lot of fasteners. You see nails and screws and nail plates, and all of these would be quite hard to remove before reuse. One more thing that we found on the timber were grade stumps. And you might think, oh, this is useful for the reuse of timber. We know the properties of the timber because of the grade stump. But is that really the case? Well, here you see that the strength class is stamped on the timber, but sometimes we found grade stumps like this one, really faint and with a bit of paint over it, so it's not even given that we can still read the grade stumps. Sometimes we find information about the origin of the timber. Here this Nord is an indication that this one comes from Scandinavia. And this might be the only useful information that we get from the grade stump, because we can't really use the strength class at all. This is because grading doesn't really look at a single piece of timber, it looks at the whole population. And we don't know which part of the population went into the building. There might have been some deliberate or accidental sorting processes in the construction or before the construction. So we don't know if this piece of timber ever had the properties of the strength class, but it might also have changed its properties during its service life. That means we would need to do some kind of regrading, and this is not entirely straightforward. We can't use the rules for new timber. But we are working on this during the project, and if you have any questions on grading, please contact my colleague Dan Ridley-Ellis, who is a real grading expert. This was our small excursion to grade stumps, but let's return to the reuse potential of demolition timber. Are there any chances, even though the timber is very damaged as it comes out of the buildings? So first of all, we asked Michael Hunter, why are buildings being demolished? Is it because the material is faulty, or was our building quite representative? And he says that yes, buildings often come to the end of their life for economic reasons. Because they need to make room for larger developments, because the ownership changes, or because the use changes. And that means that if we could make buildings more adaptable, or if we designed them in a way so they can be deconstructed and erected again elsewhere, we would have the chance to make the construction industry, demolition industry more circular. We also asked Michael Hunter if it would be possible at all, with the current demolition techniques and construction techniques, to take buildings apart more carefully and salvage the materials. And he said that the demolition industry used to work in that way. They used to salvage and sell the materials, but nowadays there is no market for these recovered materials anymore. So nowadays time is the most crucial factor in demolition projects, and time is money. There's one more aspect to it, which is the health and safety. Nowadays health and safety rules and regulations are very strict. So if people need to be involved in deconstruction processes, this could also be a barrier. But we saw that mostly economic reasons influence which buildings are demolished and how they are demolished. So how should we build today to be able to circulate tomorrow? Probably we need to design for deconstruction, and we need to enable, or we need to find markets for the salvaged products. But one more question came up in the But one more question came up in this case study, and this is, how should we build today? Because it was very apparent that no one objected to the demolition of this building, even though it was only 20-30 years old and still very much intact. The neighbors rather supported the demolition of the nursing home because they felt that it had a negative impact on the appearance of the historic house. On the other hand, more than 20 objection comments from neighbors were received for the new development. And they criticized mostly the density of the development, how close the buildings were to existing buildings, the height of the buildings, but also the design of the blocks of flats and the change in the character of the conservation area. You can read 2 of the neighboring comments here, and they are quite harsh. So I can't help but wonder, shouldn't we build in a way so people actually value the buildings they live in and the buildings they see, and they would fight for their preservation if they were to be demolished in 15 or 30 years? Maybe you have an opinion on how we should build today. You can answer this short survey and describe how your dream house looks like, and this might help us to answer this question. If you want more information on the technical aspects and the question, how should we build today to be able to circulate tomorrow, visit infuturewood.info and find out more about design for deconstruction, the grading of old timber, and design out of construction waste. Thank you for your attention. Bye!